we are often developing strategy without actually thinking about the labor implications of it. Do we have the people to pull this off? That almost never enters into the decision making process. And so it's wild. And so I think many of us have been on campuses where we're like looking at the strategic plan and we're like, I'm pretty sure that's going to implicate my office and maybe in a major way. And oh, how? Like, how are we going to do that? How are we supposed to pull
Yeah.
this off? Some of the places that I noticed that were making some real strides in terms of actually bringing some structure to their attentiveness to the employee experience and employee well-being is because it was in the strategic plan. It had some clear metrics behind it. And then there were resources that were made available to make this happen.
That was Kevin McClure, author of the book The Caring University and a faculty member and department head at UNC Wilmington. One of the big ideas in the Connected College is that staff and faculty can only support students if they take care of themselves. Kevin and I had an informative and inspired conversation about all this, and we went through many of the practical suggestions from his book about how to make it happen. For example, we dive into how better strategic planning can improve the employee experience. I think you're really going to enjoy this, so let's dive in. Welcome to the Connected College podcast. I'm your host, Elliot Felix. I've helped more than 100 colleges and universities change what they offer, how they operate, and how they're organized to enable student success. And if you're a leader in higher ed and you think that the silos and separations get in the way of student success, then this podcast and my book, The Connected College, are for you. We're here to learn and work together to bust silos, question tradition, and forge partnerships so that students feel connected to their college, their community, their coursework, and their careers. Welcome, Kevin. I'm so excited about how a caring university enables student success.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I can't wait to dive in.
Tell us a little bit about how you got started in higher ed and what you're up to today.
My higher ed origin story. So higher ed origin story is I was very much the typical over-involved undergraduate student. So very much in the housing space. I used to work summers in the housing office at my small private undergraduate institution. And so also spent a summer working in our dean's office and then figured out that student affairs was a career pathway through that. And so I went straight from undergrad into a master's degree program in student affairs and got my first professional job as I was finishing up my master's degree. And that was in a living learning program. So I spent a number of years working with international students and domestic students at the institution. They lived together in the same residence hall. And we did programming and coursework and study abroad programs for them. So I really hit a high mark in my higher ed career early on. I had the absolute coolest job
Yeah,
as my very first job.
jumping right
And
into high impact practices. Yeah,
very, yeah,
great
yeah.
place to
And
start.
I don't even know that I had the vocabulary for it, but that's what we were doing very much
Yeah,
and loved every second of it. But simultaneously also just had this itch to keep on learning and always had in the back of my mind that I was going to go get my doctorate. And through that, ended up continuing to work intensively with students, continuing to teach some as a doctoral student. And I applied for a couple of faculty jobs. I got this interview here at UNC Wilmington, and it just panned out. And this will be the start of my 11th year as a faculty member and my first year as a department chair.
congratulations. Even though you're in academia and I'm a consultant to institutions and an author and a speaker, I feel a lot of parallels. I say that I've been helping students since I was one, and sounds like you were diving right in res life and dean's office and doing that. And even I was reading through your book, The Caring University, and the stories of trying to work and do childcare early in COVID were like bringing me back, and having both written books that are really talking about all the things it takes to enable student success and how self-care and staff care and student success is only really possible if everyone can can do their job. I see a lot of parallels. And with that, I'd love to hear a little bit about your definition of student success.
I might come at this from a slightly different angle in the sense that so I work almost entirely with graduate students. And nevertheless, we are still very much in the student success game and the student success business, as it were. And some of the practices look a little different, but I think there's common threads in terms of what students need in order to be successful. They want to be engaged in work of significance that is very much connected to their values and their aspirations. And ultimately, they want to develop the skills and experiences that are going to help them get to that next step, whatever that might be, become better at some of the work that they do or to gain expertise in a domain that they didn't have previously. And so we are curators of an experience, of skill development, of exposure to existing and emerging knowledge to help them get to where they want to go. And part of our job is to figure out with them what that looks like. What is that kind of constellation of experiences that's going to help them get there?
I love the idea that the role of faculty and a college or university more broadly is curating experiences and skills and relationships to get students where they want to go and do it in a meaningful way. I think that's a wonderful definition of student success. And I like to think that student success is everyone's job. And I'd love to hear a little bit about your book and the big ideas in the Caring University and how you see those as like enablers of student success, of curating these experiences and helping students figure out where they want to go and get them there, if travel is a useful metaphor for us.
Yeah, for sure. So this is a book that's very much focused on the higher education employee experience. And that is something of a unique perspective to take because, and this is meant as no disrespect to the podcast listeners, we, for the most part, place a lot of emphasis on students and the student experience. That makes a ton of sense. But it has meant at times that we have not sufficiently paid attention to the employee experience. And I don't think that it takes a ton of calculus for all of us to recognize that our employee working conditions foster our student learning conditions. My focus in the book, of course, is on the former more so than the latter, but it is always with an eye towards the latter, which is to say, I am deeply invested in how we build better higher education institutions that are positioned to fulfill their missions, that are serving their communities as well as they possibly can. And we can't just squeeze to get these desired outputs. And sometimes the narrative around higher education feels that way, where our objective kind of gets narrowed down purely into what are we producing? How many graduates do we have? What are they studying? Are they getting jobs?
Yeah.
I really wanted, as part of this conversation, to say we need to take a look at the environmental conditions in which our employees are working, because I think that is such a necessary precursor to everything that then takes place within the classroom and within our programming spaces and our residence halls.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense to me. And I know people sometimes bristle at corporate analogies or students as customers, but I always come back to the Richard Branson quote, which is you don't put customers first, you put employees first, and then they take care of your customers. Or things like the Gallup meta-analysis of millions of data points that correlates customer engagement and employee engagement. And if you take care of your employees, you have better productivity, you have better profitability, you have better workplace safety, you have more happy customers. And of course, students are more than customers, but it just seeing faculty and staff success as a precursor to student success, I think is critical.
Yeah. And I think one of the reasons why we haven't necessarily given this the attention that it deserves is frankly, for a long period of time, we enjoyed significant demand for jobs in higher
Right.
education. We were able to hire someone, and if for whatever reason they left, it wasn't a good fit, we could swap somebody in without necessarily even making huge changes to the job. Just repost the job, and there would be pretty significant interest in from folks. And now, of course, that wasn't true with every single position. There are some places where we've always struggled to hire people. The experience with the pandemic and the Great Resignation exposed a few cracks in that logic. And we found ourselves, I think, a little flat footed in that moment because all of a sudden our employees had a different set of expectations of the workplace. And we're still grappling with that now, but I think it is forcing us to have a different type of conversation about what is our responsibility as employers, not just our responsibility as a institution with resources, not just our responsibility to students who are paying tuition and expecting an education, but what is our responsibility to the people that we have hired? And that's the conversation that I'm part of, that I'm encouraging us to have. And I'm encouraging institutions to really take that responsibility seriously.
And as they take that responsibility seriously, how did we get to where we are? The book and in your comments, you foreground the Great Recession as part of it. I think a few minutes ago, you used the verb squeeze, which I think is a very apt metaphor because it somehow we got in this cycle of do more with less and people were spread thin, and then pandemic and Great Resignation, it was just do more and more with less and less. How did we get here?
There's a couple of different causes. It's multifaceted and it's going to look a little bit different from campus to campus. A big problem is that in many cases, we never really developed an understanding of staffing sufficiency in higher education. And so we have often not really tracked people's workloads or felt as if paying attention to people's workloads was necessary. We're paying you a salary, you'll work whatever we give to you. And so as a consequence of that, it was easy for people's workloads to really balloon. And during the pandemic, certainly there was an explosion for many people, myself included. Our workloads just absolutely exploded. And then people paused and said, okay, now let me think about what am I being compensated for this work that is absolutely exhausting me, making it hard for me to build a life outside of work because I'm spending all my time recovering from work. And then folks started to say, I'm actually not getting paid particularly well for this. And that is getting harder as housing prices increase, and with inflation, all sorts of services have become more expensive. And so people are pausing and saying, I'm working so hard. And yes, I care about this work, but it's just really hard to make a living doing this. And so I think those are two big causes. You throw in there, of course, that we've had a ton of financial uncertainty. We've had politicization that has rendered certain aspects of our work much harder to accomplish. And the risk is we lose good people. We have lost good people.
Right.
Folks are not nearly as engaged as they could be. They aren't as strong as educators. And again, the risk is that students notice this, that the student experience is not optimized because our people just do not have the bandwidth.
Such great observations, like the not accounting for staff time and what people do. Like when I do consulting work, doing service models and staffing models for student services, whether it's library or writing center or tutoring or whatever, there two things always happen inevitably. One is when we look at the portfolio of things that they offer and put it all on a whiteboard with each thing as a post-it, inevitably leadership will say there's an oh shit moment, like this is too much stuff. When you lay it all out in a tangible way, they say, oh my gosh, this is too much stuff. We need to consolidate. We can't keep adding to this. So there's always that realization. Then the other thing we do to couple that with a staffing model is we go through and we say for each program or service offering, how much of that is X person's job or Y person's job. And they've never done that before. They've never thought about staffing by service offering or by, oh, so this person spends half their time doing this and a quarter doing that and a quarter doing this. And those two simple things are invariably enlightening and are surprisingly simple, but yet novel for folks. But I just don't think there is a good accounting for that. And then the other thing I think is the strategy, because I think if you're not focused, then you keep getting into this cycle of do more with less. And my hope is that people can be more focused so they can actually do less with more, have more resources to devote to fewer things because they're more focused. And I know there's 6 big ideas or 6 transformations in the Caring University. Like, how do you get those into the strategic plan?
Yeah. First of all, so there is a chapter in the book that talks about the absence of employees in our strategic plan. So if this goes
Yeah.
straight to your point,
Or it's usually the goal number 5, organizational
yes,
excellence.
that's right.
That's just like the afterthought. Oh,
It's
by
kind
the
of
way, to do these 4 big things, we're going to have to do this other thing. And like, it's a tiny little coda.
absolutely. And there's not any specificity to it. And so that's if employees register at all in the strategic plan, which is,
Yeah.
it goes to say that we are often developing strategy without actually thinking about the labor implications of it. Do we have the people to pull this off? That almost never enters into the decision-making process. And so it's wild. And so I think many of us have been on campuses where we're like looking at the strategic plan and we're like, I'm pretty sure that's going to implicate my office and maybe in a major way. And how? Like, how are we going to do that? How are we supposed to pull
Yeah.
this off?
What are we going to stop doing what am I supposed to stop doing of all the things I'm doing now to do that new
Right.
thing? Yeah.
Now, so here's what's interesting and why I really appreciate your question. Of course, I came into this as a faculty member with a certain level of skepticism and cynicism of strategic planning. Yet I have come out of it a much bigger believer in the importance of that process. And it's because as I've been doing this research, I have found that one of the real levers that we can pull to advance employee well-being is the strategic plan. And it is crucial that we get this into the strategic plan. Some of the places that I noticed that we're making some real strides in terms of actually bringing some structure to their attentiveness to the employee experience and employee well-being is because it was in the strategic plan. It had some clear metrics behind it. And then there were resources that were made available to make this happen. There are 6 big organizational changes that I'm advocating that I think if we were to pursue in a collective, intentional, ongoing way would help us arrive at an institution that better prioritizes the well-being of employees. And those are making the employee experience a strategic priority. So combining our strategic plan with a talent management strategy, thinking about how our policies and practices are better matched for what it means to be a real breathing human and not an ideal worker. Looking at our professional growth and our compensation practices to make sure that they are fair and that we are providing robust in-house professional development, equity and belonging for our employees, because it's really difficult to demonstrate care when folks feel tokenized or marginalized or discriminated against. Ensuring that employees have voice in the workplace and that their rights are respected. And then lastly, how we cultivate and nurture caring leadership. And each of those could be embedded into a strategic plan and made into a priority. So if it's something around pay equity, for example, that's something that we sometimes see in strategic plans and something that we could certainly see more of. That would be a relatively easy step for an institution to say, we're going to do some equity audits, get a sense of where we are noticing disparities in our compensation that are not serving us well. They're not allowing us to retain talented people, and they're just plainly unfair. And that might be an easy starting point to bring compensation up, but just to make sure that people are being paid in an equitable fashion. So that's an example of something that could be easily integrated into a strategic plan and that I have seen integrated into a strategic plan. Some will also do, for example, a compensation study. They'll do some reclassification to ensure that positions and position descriptions and titles are up to date and competitive in the market. And those are ones that, again, are nice because there's concrete actions associated with them. There could be metrics that get applied to them, and they're not necessarily ones that are fuzzy. But the long story short is that there is a way through the strategic plan to bring some of these ideas to life, and I'm all for it.
Let's say folks are making these 6 shifts to prioritize the employee experience and to realize equity and belonging and make sure employees have a voice and they've got more human policies and practices and they're looking at growth and compensation and they're cultivating caring leaders. What are the things that are changing how institutions do those 6 things, right? Because they're making these changes to better care for their employees who can in turn better care for students and enable their success, but they're not doing it while standing still.
It's a true challenge, and you likely have picked up on this because this is not your first rodeo thinking about organizational change in higher ed. But yeah, this is something that I'm advocating, mindful of the fact that we're also attempting to do 12 other things. At my own institution, we are in the process of trying to implement just a massive stack of new policies from our system office. We've got policies that we are anticipating coming from our state legislature. We have some looming budgetary questions. We've got new programs that we want to launch. And so there are competing priorities here, right? I think it's important to think about making some space for these conversations and some of these concrete approaches, because it's going to be really hard to pull off the other stuff in the absence of doing so. As a department chair, there's all sorts of stuff that we are going to have to do, that we're being compelled to do, and things that we want to do as a department. I have a finite group of people with a finite amount of time. My ability to pull off those changes is predicated on their bandwidth, their engagement. So I'm able to envision walking into a department meeting and saying, okay, here are our 5 priorities that we want to try to pull off this year. And the only way I know that we're going to be able to do this is if I walk into that meeting having a sense of what their workload looks like right now, what types of things are going on in their personal lives, making sure that I'm in relationship with them enough and noticing enough that I have some awareness of that. Thinking through what's truly feasible with the group of people that we have. And so what I'm getting at with all of this is some of the approaches that I'm advocating as part of the Caring University are based on the idea that we need to have enough knowledge of the employee experience, who our people are, what their workload looks like, to be able to say, we can pull this off. Here's how. Here are the people who are positioned to be able to do this work. Here are the people who I'm going to need to lighten their load otherwise if they're going to engage in this in the way that I'd like. Or we've got this thing that we've been doing for the last 5 years over here. Maybe it has reached a logical conclusion and we need to sunset that so that we've got our attention over here. And so every single day as a leader, I need to have attentiveness to my people in order for that change to take place. Our capacity to change well is partly based on some of these structural and cultural conditions that make up our workplace experience. And if we don't have to do all these things at once, we don't have to do all 6 changes at once. We are not aiming for perfection. There is no final destination or endpoint here. If we start thinking about some of these domains of the employee experience and working to improve them bit by bit, I think we're going to see dividends in our efforts to change and improve elsewhere.
It's interesting as I think about those 6 dimensions and everything you're saying, it really does seem like it's like a 1-2 punch between big picture institutional strategy and day-to-day leadership and management practices. And it seems like you have to have both, right? You have to have employee voice in the strategy, but you also have to have managers that are in touch with and aware of their people and what they're working on and how much work they have and what's going on for them personally as well as professionally. And it's like if you don't have either of those, it falls apart. And one thing you said I wanted to pull on this thread because you're talking about there's all these competing priorities and you're going to have to, maybe there's something you've been doing for a while that you're going to have to sunset. It strikes me that one leadership practice that higher ed is not so great at is saying no, is the sunsetting. What's your best advice to caring leaders who want to say no so that people can focus, so that they aren't feeling the squeeze? What's your secret saying no sauce?
I loved something that you said at the beginning of our conversation, which is really around focus. And I do think that remains an incredible challenge for a lot of institutions is to be able to, with a degree of courage and audacity, say, this is what we are all about, very simply. And through that, it enables you to make a set of choices around what's serving us well at this point. What are some things that we need to pursue or continue? And what are some new things we need to pursue? And then what are some things that were maybe a vestige of the past that don't make as much sense? Now, I think here's where it gets really challenging. And I want to own this right up front.
Own it,
Part
baby.
part of what we're talking about here in some cases is sunsetting things that have implications for people's jobs.
Yeah,
That's
that's
where
really
it
tough
gets
part of the
really
conversation.
difficult. That's where it gets difficult and where I cannot look at you in the eye right now and tell you that I would have the same level of courage that I'm advocating in saying that it's time to end something or no, we're not going to keep doing this because it could end someone's job at an institution. And that doesn't strike anybody as particularly caring on some
Yeah,
level. So I've grappled with this quite a bit. And part of this is the reality of where we are in higher education right now, which is contraction is happening. Contraction is happening, whether it's voluntary or involuntary. And I think I'd rather be on the voluntary side of it and to take responsibility for our future. And it does mean that we're going to have some hard conversations. And we are likely going to have to end some programs or initiatives that, yeah, could have job implications for people. There's still a way I think we can do that with an ethic of care and to treat people as well as possible, even if there's pain in the process. And so one of the things I'll say that's really interesting in this work is sometimes people equate care and niceness or care and making everybody happy. And you're a parent, you care for your children, you know that's not the job all the time, right? Sometimes the job is making hard decisions for your family. Sometimes the job is knowing that this is going to make somebody that you care for really unhappy, but it's important nevertheless. And so the same is true as I've had conversations with higher ed employees as part of this research. Most of them have a really clear-eyed understanding of the realities that higher ed is facing. And they know that jobs don't last forever. They are not asking for universal satisfaction and niceness all the time. They are, however, really interested in fairness and transparency and living up to the standards that we set for ourselves. So there is accountability built into it. I think we might need to, in some cases, embrace that a little bit more and say, yes, these are hard decisions. Let's do this as transparently as possible. Let's try to be as fair as we possibly can. And let's live up to our own standards. And it doesn't mean that there will be no pain and no conflict, but people, nevertheless, I think will be able to better understand and respect that decision.
those are tough decisions. Those are tough conversations, and you hate to see anybody lose their job. I think the reality is, though, that right now we're in a situation where supply exceeds demand. And one of the studies I cite in my book looked at growth of personnel over the last 40 years, and non-instructional staff have grown at 5 times the rate of enrollment for a lot of good reasons, right? Advising, the research enterprise that doesn't really track with enrollment, right? If you're a lab manager or you're a staff scientist, a lot of it's compliance driven. When I asked you about changes, you're talking about policy shifts, regulatory shifts. A lot of that is certainly understandable. But when you grow at 5 times enrollment, there's bound to be some disconnects, I think, and there's bound to have to be some alignment of the supply of programs and services and staff and faculty with the demand there is from students and society and employers. And there's bound to be some reckoning. But as you're saying, the way you can do that reckoning can be fair and can be transparent and can be caring.
There's a necessary conversation in higher education that should be had. And it's been had in other sectors, and we can learn from that. I think there'd be a lot of benefit to bringing it together and a good resource for folks. But basically, how we do exactly that. How do we contract as an institution, change as an institution, and in some cases,
collaborate.
Partner, collaborate, but in some cases be prepared for the fact that it could mean separations. How do we do that with integrity and care? Because I don't know that's happening at the moment based on what I'm hearing as I continue to do this work. And so there's some necessary conversations to be had there.
Your book grapples with these difficult conversations and hard choices that people have to make personally and professionally. But I would also characterize it as a hopeful book because I think you see the promise of creating a more caring university in the future. I'd love to hear what's something that gives you hope as you think about the future and how institutions can better care for their employees and in turn enable student success.
So much of this book is actually built on real life examples. And these are places that are trying things. They are innovating. They are grappling with the real issues that they have. And so it signals to me that this is possible. None of these places are perfect. I just want to be clear. There's no such thing as a perfect institution. The caring university does not exist. Instead, what I see are places that are taking steps. And through that, it means that the rest of us that may be not quite as far along on the journey can take steps as well. And so that gives me hope. I have now interviewed over probably 150 staff, faculty, and leaders at institutions across the country. And we have so much talent in our institutions. We have brilliant people who want to do the right thing. So we've got the raw materials here. And now for those of us that are interested in how we help higher education get to a better place, it's a challenge for us. And to help translate good ideas in a way that all of these talented people are able to pick up and run with. And so that's what I've tried to do as part of this work. That's what I'm going to try to continue doing. And I get really fired up thinking about. It's amazing. And you may find this in your own work. We've got these amazing institutions full of incredible people. We've got some good research on what works around change management and student success. And yet some of these things just aren't coming together. How in the world is this not happening? And so there remains for all of us that are interested in this, so much work to do to help bring these things together, bring the good ideas, the great people to build better institutions.
It's a great way to end. And it's such a hopeful thought because I think in the same way that during the pandemic, institutions looked inside themselves and tapped all that expertise, whether it was public health or biochemistry or communications or crisis management or whatever it might be. And they drew upon all that expertise to really to help themselves and each other. I think that expertise is still there in different ways and shapes and forms. And it's available to create more effective organizations and institutions that better care for their people.
I couldn't agree more. And I actually am left, having done this work, more hopeful than I was when I started it, even though I am still to this day getting all sorts of messages from people about the experiences that they've had at institutions. Not all of them are very good, mind you. And there are real challenges. I don't want to trivialize. There are real challenges, but I think that we have what we need in order to meet those challenges.
Thanks for listening to the Connected College Podcast.
Subscribe to my Connected College newsletter at elliottfelix.com for insights and excerpts from my book, tools you can download, and special offers. You can also find more information about talks I've given, articles I've written, and upcoming events there. And please support the podcast by rating and reviewing it wherever you're listening. Let's create connected colleges where students will succeed.